afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. It's Alyssa Corum and Ed Carson here. We're going to talk about the action in the major indexes. The NASDAQ having a notable day. The major indexes seems like shrugged off this negative vaccine news today, Ed, and a couple of pretty standout stocks underneath the surface that we're going to take a look at.
Yeah, there's a lot of nice action today, Ellie. Tesla cleared some clear resistance. So did vaccine play Maravai Life Sciences, and new IPO Roblox broke out.
All right. Well, first, here's a look at the tech-heavy NASDAQ, which gained 1% today, closing just under that 14,000 level. And the S&P 500 up 0.3% today. The Dow a little bit weaker, down about 0.2%. But for the NASDAQ and S&P 500 in particular, it seems like the buying really kicked into gear in the second half of the session today.
Yeah, there was a lot of good things going on. One thing that helped the NASDAQ in particular, and a lot of those big techs in the S&P 500, there was a treasury auction that went pretty well. Treasury yields fell. They actually were falling during the day, despite a hotter than expected consumer price index. Yeah, the 0TNX is a way to look at it. So that was falling all day. And you can see it sort of undercut the 21-day line. Not that, it's the lowest in a couple of weeks. I mean, it is showing a trend is sort of, breaking a little bit. And that's just a positive sign for valuation for stocks that are highly valued. The NASDAQ's at a record, and almost at a record high, and the NASDAQ 100 did hit a record high.
So yeah, we'll take a look at QQQ here, breaking out of this cut base here. So shows you in just a matter of what, 2.5 weeks, a world of difference can make.
Yeah, and it can go either way. You can look back in February, everything's looking fine, and then it's not. And you just have to be flexible with it. You can't say, well, the market's negative, I'm going to take away the next few months. You have to react to it. And I will say that underneath the surface, there's still this rotation going on. Tesla, some of these highly valued stocks, software, they're coming back. Chips are actually sitting around moving down, with the exception of NVIDIA. Some of the reopening plays, they're sort of moving sideways or down. So you just have to stay on top of this. It's not, you can't even just set it, forget it. I've got some good stocks, I'm moving away. You have to stay in focus here.
Yeah, and you and I have talked in recent days how you don't want to get too concentrated in one area. You need to make sure that your portfolio doesn't get hit too hard if you just had reopening plays or one specific area, or like all the chips, if you piled into those when those chip equipment makers started looking good, that can definitely have an impact on your portfolio. But I do want to take a look at Tesla, which you mentioned having a strong day today, closing up almost 9% here, above average volume. And we were talking about Tesla yesterday as our stock of the day, a very non-traditional stock of the day at that, with it below its downward sloping 50-day line. But that's no longer the case, at least as of right now, Ed. And I think a pretty strong finish to the day.
Yeah, I mean, it basically finished at the session highs, like basically everything did. But yeah, strong volume. And you can look at the bottom, obviously in hindsight, it looks better now, but now you see a number of up days. I mean, it wasn't overwhelming, moves, but there was just more accumulation than selling along the way. Yesterday was sort of a setup day. It went above its 10-week line, but today it went above its 50-day line and those March highs. And so you can, yesterday was sort of a setup day in that regard, because it was definitely signaling something, getting above those areas that it's like, okay, now we're above some resistance. Now, as Chris Gessler was saying on IBD Live, it's not ideal to have the downward sloping 50-day line. It's just, you'd rather see it do more. I mean, again, we're seeing that with a lot of the growth stocks because they were down so hard, the 50 days have come over, right? It's not like unique to Tesla. So,
making it a higher risk of an entry point.
That's a higher risk. But clearly it's gone above resistance levels. I mean, so it is an area where it's the first time basically since it rolled over that you could, there's really a strong buy signal. Now, I think it'd be great if it could get up to 800, or somewhere in there or higher, and then form a handle and then really set up. But Tesla has tended not to do that. It's tended to sort of move pretty, sort of low in the base and this sort of surge higher. So we'll just have to see. Also, there's earnings coming up. And so that's something investors should be aware of. That could go either way, but definitely something that could move this stock.
All right. Well, if investors did take advantage of the entry point, whether it be yesterday or early on in the session today, just make sure now, I guess, that you don't let all of those gains disappear. So now let's take a look at RBLX, a recent IPO that we've been keeping tabs on for a good reason. With the stock gaining over 9% today, hitting new highs, breaking out of this IPO base. We identified a couple of different early entries here. And since its debut with the IPO price at 45, all of its trading history really has been above that level. So that's a sign of strength versus, I think, some of the other recent IPOs that we were taking a look at, like Joanne.
Joanne, you're right. And this one, it's nice action here. The volume was pretty strong. Yeah, it's not going to be above some of those prior days, but the first few days of an IPO, there's mammoth volume. So this is the highest in basically a month. It's been picking up as it's gone up. As you said, there was a couple little early buy points, like sort of, here maybe, or sort of like a pseudo handle in this area. So there's places you could have maybe started a position, because at this point, it does feel like it's a little high. It's gone up a lot. Even just from 70 to 85, just in the last week and a half, it feels like it's getting up there. So you can buy it here, but you just have to know that there's a very high risk of a pullback. You could wait for it to pull back closer to the buy point. There's not necessarily an ideal strategy, because obviously this thing could run up, and sometimes that happens. But you don't want to, I wouldn't overload your position in something like a new IPO here, because it could easily come back to 80. It could come back to 75. I mean, it could fail and it could go pretty quickly.
Joanne is a good visual representation of that, breaking out of the IPO base and immediately pulling in. Of course, we're not saying that's what's going to happen with Roblox, but it just shows that these IPOs can be a little tricky to handle.
Yeah, you just have to be paying attention. If you're going to play IPOs, know that is something you really have to be watching, like a toddler. You never know when they're going to run off and get into something dangerous. They seem so lovable, and then all of a sudden they wander off, and it's like, oh, they're sticking a fork in the electrical outlet. It's like you've got to pay attention to IPOs.
That's a good one, Ed. And last but not least, Maravai Life Sciences. They make a key component for the Pfizer-BioNTech drug, and with the negative news now tied to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, Maravai investors coming into this stock today.
Yeah, and it actually turned out to be higher volume today. It looked like it was going to be lighter, so that was nice. 4 straight days of higher volume. This all comes after a sell-off on a stock offering. You can see those numbers. PSO means proposed stock offering, and then SO, the actual stock offering, happened. So it came down, but now it's rebounded. It's broken a trend line depending on how you draw it, and you can even draw it from that, just sort of, but it seems to be breaking a trend line. It's rebounding from the 50-day line. So you could probably treat this as an early entry. It's actually, obviously it's getting up there now from the 50-day line, 10-week line, but it was flashing that kind of buy signal. The profit growth has been really strong, and it's going to be really strong this year. It has other things other than the Pfizer vaccine supplier note, but obviously when you make several billion doses of the Pfizer vaccine, being a supplier to that is probably going to be fairly lucrative, and that's what people are betting on.
So Ed, when it comes to something like this, how do you get it on your radar early on in the session before it really gets extended? I mean, it did finish the day about 7% above its 10-week, so still within range, but how do you think you can kind of spot some of these earlier on in the session?
Well, this is why you have to have a watch list and you're building it up. This one came on our radar a few months ago when it first broke out, and then it had really volatile action. So it was hard to hold, and then it did all sorts of things, but you just have to, get a watch list and keep on trying to keep it fairly broad and draw a lot of alerts. Like MarketSmith has alerts where you can draw it or just set it on the price target, or you can, I had an alert today. I just sort of drew it pretty tightly just so I could be sure to see it, something like that. So, and then, we do it. So we set an alert. So when it crosses there, it pops up in a little button, and then it lets us know. So, you're keeping tabs on it without having to look at it every 10 seconds. So that's what we try to do here.
Great point. All right. Well, we have a webinar coming up at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific with Chris Gessel and Justin Nielsen. They are going to be talking about supercharged ETFs and, as Chris teased this morning on IBD Live, a new strategy that they are going to be debuting and explaining during this webinar. So for all the details on that, make sure you check it out. Go to investors.com/webinar. And we will also have the recording of it up on the site within 24 hours, like we usually do with our webinars. But if you want to catch it live, that's how you could do it. Also, there should be big promotions all over investors.com right now. So you should be able to see that. But investors.com/webinar is a great way to do it as well. That's it for today, everyone. And we'll see you back here tomorrow.